between place and product making. Whereas in the new craft economy, place becomes central to quality food making, marketing, and consuming. So again, for someone somewhere like Eastern Ontario could really work together to be known as a high quality food environment, combining tourism and all those things together. A good example is actually Hardwick, Vermont, that really dug deep into its past and started to really come together as a community and focus on food as a way to really save the ailing town that had been hit hard by the recession. It's a wonderful sort of case study of a town that really sort of rallied around what they knew they did well. There are many dimensions of the new creative food economy, and I don't have time to go into them all now, but in Ontario, for example, and I've written about this before in a paper for the Martin Prosperity Institute, From Craft to Craft, is that Ontario actually has a lot of interesting advantage in things like peanut nut-free manufacturing, which really came about kind of through as a result of sort of a law, Sabrina's law, that actually required safer manufacturing practices. And as a result, we have a company like Dare Foods that is all nut-free, and their products are now exported around the world, and they're seen as specialty products in other cities and countries around the world. So it's a kind of a nice example of the kinds of new food economy dimensions that exist out there. We have companies like Mapleton Organic that's really starting to find new pathways to market. It's an interesting example of a small dairy that started off in the early 80s as a conventional farm, but soon found it unsustainable. The dairy and grain farm is 600 acres. It's a small firm that employs 6 full-time, but what they've been sort of looking to construct an alternative to a conventional market through explicit emphasis on community-shared relationships. You can find their products in certain markets and not others, and that's been an explicit choice on their part. And then we have other really interesting dimensions of the new food economy in Ontario, with companies now practicing more sun-based agriculture, unlike conventional factory farm that does not require the same fossil fuel energy to its products and processes. For example, these two companies, Beretta and U-Ranch, they have no oil-based fertilizers or pesticides. U-Ranch was a former tobacco farm that has moved towards more sustainable agriculture. So those are sort of just examples, and I don't have time to go into, but I think they're indicative of something new and different that's happening that we've been documenting, and I have much more detail in papers on these things. Another really important dimension of the food economy, of course, is the huge ethnic food markets that exist in places like our big cities. And what we really found was that these arose largely because a lot of new immigrants to Canada, when we interviewed them, very knowledgeable, very well educated, unfortunately they couldn't make an entry into sort of traditional corporate Canada, and as a result they started out in the food industry. And what I find interesting is that a lot of implicit government programs around immigrant expansion and multicultural policy probably did more to facilitate the rise of this industry than any kind of explicit food-driven policies. So all those things are kind of really interesting. One of the main themes we found in all these small and medium-sized companies is a lot of them grapple with distribution challenges. A lot of them require now some public policy support, and we've started to see that happen in the last few years. But I think, as I argue in my paper From Craft to Craft, a lot more could be done. So, for example, we could create a Ministry of Food, not just a ministry that focuses on agricultural commodities from a strictly rural development perspective, but a ministry oriented towards food from a health, ecological, social, cultural, and economic perspective. A ministry that considers the entire food chain from field to fork to waste. That could adopt broader policies around the social, health, economic, and environmental benefits of quality food. So examples would be better labeling regarding food safety, greater supply side capacity for locally produced food, and just generally a healthier food choice environment. Now obviously this idea is not new. leading food and economic development experts have really been promoting them for years. But I think with strong public interest now, this is the opportunity time to make change. And I go on in the paper to also talk about ways that we could re-solarize the farm, where we can encourage much more sun-based agriculture. We can also re-regionalize the system through important supply-side capacity innovations, and just rebuild our food culture. There's many ways of doing that as well. But I just want to summarize now, but I think what I'm trying to say in that example is that when you start to think about an economy in a different way, where you sort of, you really go out and look at the messy geography of place, is what the economic geographer in me does. It forces you to try and come up with new ways of thinking about how to measure the economy and how to think about it. And so I would argue that creative economy is still a significant concept in the long intellectual history of local economic development. It's had many new reiterations. There's a whole new generation of scholars doing fascinating work. It's a dynamic concept, unlike a lot of other economic development modeling, like the ones I mentioned, multipliers and input-output table. It's trying to not be static, but trying to capture the dynamism in places. And as a result, it demands rigorous multi-method empirical investigation. I would argue that the conceptual model can apply to firms, to sectors, to talent. Certainly the work that JP has done at KEDCO around the Moneson Centre on how do we retain all our wonderful Queen's grads in Kingston as an opportunity for more economic spillover in the region. But it's always within the context of particular places and geographies, whether those are urban, rural, peri-urban, or peripheral. So I would like to, before I end, just acknowledge all the wonderful students and institutions that I'm involved in, all the work that our QKIS team does, researching the social dynamics of economic performance in Canada, as well as Professor Wolf Gertler and Deborah Huntley at the University of Toronto, Richard Florida and Kevin Stoller at the Martin Prosperity, and Dr. Chan and colleagues at the Moneson Centre, and some of my other wonderful students who've been out there in the field collecting all this data. So thank you very much.
I'd like to open the floor for questions. We have about 5 minutes. We do have remote questions potentially also coming in. If your question is stated quietly, we'll ask Dr. Donald to repeat the question before responding. Thank you.
Here's a general question, and it's difficult to answer. There obviously is a huge amount of information of value to the rural parts of Eastern Ontario. How can this be, in due course, disseminated across the rural townships so that it has value and merit in the eyes of the economic development officers?
That's a great question. I mean, that's sort of the ultimate goal, I think, of the Moneson Centre. I mean, that's what the Moneson Centre, what we're trying to do with this series, is to, get that knowledge out there. And we also have on the Moneson Centre website, they have. We're trying to write these blogs on, things that are happening, and I mean, I think that by coming to seminars like this, and then also, I know that perhaps Dr. Chan, you can just explain what you've been doing in the smaller communities around the research program.
Okay, to rephrase Peter's question, it's how do we actually make a difference with when we are a region, and there's clearly much to be done. The Moneson Centre has a small role in the transformation of this region. At Queen's, our focus is providing academic knowledge to communities like Eastern Ontario and addressing real problems using the scholarship within the academic community. So as Dr. Donald was saying, we have a website, with 2 websites. The one that's focused on knowledge impact in society, which is taking the knowledge and impacting society, focuses on, or includes blogs. It includes tweeting. We tweet. In fact, you'll see Jeff Dixon at the back.